Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I think it is 10:01, and so we will get started. Kelsey, you can get going.
Yeah, welcome. So just some reminders to start us off. The session is being recorded. It will be posted on the ProGrow catalog. Please keep your microphone muted to minimize background noise. If you have follow-up questions, we're going to be posting a link in the chat. We'll post it a few times, so you can use this link to access our Google form and submit questions or comments. And then we'll get started. So thanks for joining us.
Next slide, please. Sue, do you mind changing the slide? All right, thank you. And we have Sue here. She's going to help us work through our slide deck together. It is Professional Growth Day, January 27th, 2025. The address to the slide deck is found on that post-it up at the top. You can also use that QR code, and it should be linked into our program that you were able to access the Zoom link from. Sue, thank you so much for being here with us. Will you please click the next slide? Okay. Today's professional learning as a school district is all connected to this essential learning, which you all heard about this morning from your staff meeting. Our session, Environment and Co-Regulation, is a supportive piece to this question and really asking how can we leverage data to design and implement high-quality instruction that addresses the diverse needs of every student. We know that the environment is a dynamic force that can really help our students to be more available for thinking and learning. And often this background piece sets the stage for us in high quality instruction. Next slide, please.
So today's schedule, you're joining us for webinar session number 1. It goes from 10 until 10:40. So we will be with you for the next 36 minutes. Next slide, please.
Okay, I want you to take a moment, and before we click anything or enter anything into the chat, I would love for you to just take a moment and think about yourself. Think about how you spend your time during the school day. Think about how you might prefer to spend time during your school day, what an ideal or successful day might look like for you. As you do that, looking at these 4 pictures, in your opinion, which one doesn't belong and why? We're going to pause before we press enter in the chat. There is a sentence frame for you to use if you would like, but you can type in the chat box and just wait to press enter until we've given a little think time for everyone. I'm going to give everyone 1 minute. Even though it seems like a long time, I am looking at my time and it says 10:04. I'm going to give us a just switch to 10:05. So I'm going to give us until about 10:06. So just kind of think through which one doesn't belong for you. And then in a minute, we will press enter and kind of see all the responses as a waterfall. This is great when if we had music and we don't have music.
Some background music.
I know. Okay, and now we can press enter and you can make sure that it's going to everyone. And we can kind of see a waterfall of responses just to see kind of what people are thinking. Letter C. Letter C, the teacher's not actively engaging with her students that we can see. Letter C doesn't belong. I personally don't get myself the me time. Letter D doesn't belong because I want to keep negative emotions out of my classroom as best as possible. D, she seems overwhelmed. C, because we never have downtime. This is true. C, no reciprocity. Yeah. Let's go to the next slide.
So this is our plan for our time together today. We are going to quickly introduce ourselves, ground us in a little understanding about what regulation is and why it is important for us to understand not only the mechanisms for regulation while creating our classroom and school environments, but just have a deeper, more comprehensive knowledge to that. And then we will talk about 5 levers that can support regulation and why they work. And then to wrap up, we'll give you all some resources and strategies that you can use to tap into your regulation system and support your well-being in the classroom. Next slide.
All right, we're going to start off with some introductions. You can go to the next slide. So my name's Kelsey McKinney. I'm the lead occupational therapist for Poway Unified School District. I've been working as an OT with PUSD for 6 years. This is my 4th year as the lead. I love working at all of our sites throughout the district. I've worked with many of you. I can see your names in the chat and on the screen to support our students, our staff, and also getting to work with our occupational therapists. So it's nice to meet you all.
My name is Izzy Ralph. I am an occupational therapist at Poway Unified. I work at Chaparral Elementary. I have been an OT at Poway Unified for a little over a year now. And I love not only working at Chaparral, but supporting my students and teachers to develop functional school skills. Thanks for being here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Snow, and I'm a teacher on special assignment. I support teachers and students creating access for learning opportunities. I've been with the school district for, I think, 16 years now, and I'm really excited to be sharing some information with you all. Next slide. All right, so the introductions are complete. We're going to move into regulation. And so next slide, please.
So the big question is, what is regulation and why does it matter? So next slide. So what is regulation and what does it mean? Well, regulation refers to the ability to manage emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in response to different situations, meaning controlled impulses and staying calm even when faced with challenges. That's all a part of the regulation system. Co-regulation, on the other hand, happens when 2 people help each other regulate their emotions. In order to learn and teach, we have that optimal arousal, which is that green zone, when we are calm, alert, and available. We also need to be able to respond calmly when challenges happen to model it for our students. That is our why behind incorporating sensory regulation techniques into the environment. So with that in mind, knowing what regulation is, dysregulation primarily shows an imbalance in activity between the limbic system, which is the center for emotional processing in the brain, and the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive functioning. And so when you're dysregulated, those 2 things essentially they shut off. So since our students are still developing these areas of their brain, it's important to reflect on the state of dysregulation and stress and agitation, and that they are not in a position to follow directions or demands, answer questions, at least logically, or respond in an appropriate fashion that they probably normally would if they weren't dysregulated. So when students are dysregulated or they're in this yellow to red area, they can be accessing their fight or flight mode, which makes them unable to respond and think logically. This is the same for adults as well. We just maybe have had the time and the skills to learn more regulation techniques than especially our elementary school students have. Next slide, please.
Okay, so Izzy did a great job sharing a little bit around the background information on regulation and why it's important. Now we're going to talk about the environment. Next slide, please. The environment is a critical force within our classrooms, which is really, really exciting when we begin to understand that. When we know how we can shape our spaces and how making shifts can impact the student experience, it empowers us to begin to make decisions and then observe what happens with that shift in practice, giving us that observational data to support our high quality instruction for each of our students. As we talk through these levers, I absolutely understand that we have wide variability in our classrooms. When we discuss these 5 areas, I want you to think about that these are expected to support at least 80% of the students in your classroom. Once we have this solid foundation, we then can build the additional supports that some students may need to be successful. But these recommendations really support that solid tier 1 foundation in our classrooms. And when we're reaching out for support from some of our district support folks, we're really looking at some of those tier 1 levers that we're going to talk about so that we can then build on them. So next slide, please. The first lever is going to be structure. And so next slide. When I mention structure, I'm often thinking about these 2 main pieces. It's about schedule and it's about routines. Schedules are really the foundational piece of everything that happens during the school day. Each day of the week might have small differences, but generally speaking, there should be a consistent schedule, ideally a school-wide schedule or a grade level schedule, and all members of the community know what they're doing during those times. This means you, the students, service providers, volunteers know and understand what the schedule is and what's happening at what times and where everyone is during that time of day. Routines now are the ways in which we make it through our schedule each day. When navigating a space up to 31 students, plus the additional adults who might be pushing in, pulling students, guest teachers, special events, VAPA, whatever we have going on, routines are really that critical piece to coordinate all of those individual efforts to create that flow throughout our day.
Schedules and routines can provide predictability for students and staff. When students know what to expect, then they're able to focus on their learning, and worrying about what the day will look like is reduced. Well-defined routines help support easy transitions between tasks during the day, which will support students' regulation. We can also add things into our schedule that support regulation. Especially during transitions. So an easy example is everyone can take 3 deep breaths before we walk to the carpet for circle time. If we do that every morning as part of our routine, everyone is getting practice in a strategy of taking deep breaths while they're calm, supporting a calmer transition to the carpet, which is setting up our carpet time for success. Next slide.
So here is what a student-facing schedule might look like on the left-hand side. And what the routines to work through the schedule might look like. The routine side is much more detailed. I don't have to read that to you. I can read a little bit of it, but at 7:40 during the welcoming, you greet students at the door. As students enter the classroom, they place their red folder in the bin, they log into their Chromebooks, complete the SEL check-in. Once students have completed their check-in, they may take out a book or their book bins that are numbered on the bookshelf and the whiteboard. Mr. J will be in the classroom and will observe to make sure that Belinda's logging in and completing the check-in. As she's working through that, Mr. J is also gathering materials needed to support the ELA rotations by checking the groupings chart. So that's just for that piece of 7:40, which on our student-facing schedule just says welcoming, right? But as that kind of conductor in the classroom or that lead person in the classroom, you're thinking about all of those players. And so in walking through that mental movie, I know what we're trying to accomplish. We want everyone to come in and we want everyone to do that SEL check-in. I want the support staff to really be meaningful and efficient in when they're in that space. It helps me be really clear what we're working on accomplishing and setting those expectations. And when I have students who are struggling through some part of the day, I know what my desired result is because I've done that mental movie. I've kind of walked through what ideal would look like. And I can also think about what would that first approximation look like for a student who's really struggling at being able to get their Chromebook, log in, and take that SEL check-in. I also recognize that if there are 5 or more students that are actually struggling with this at the same time, that it indicates to me that as the teacher, I really need to start thinking about how am I giving information around what that routine is? How am I structuring it and making sure that everyone understands? Because again, if I have more than 5 students, then there's probably something missing in my tier 1. And it's just something that maybe we're overlooking or that we took for granted in years past. And now our students aren't really maybe full of the skills that they were in previous years. When we look at the schedule and we look at that routine side, it can be really overwhelming to think about like, oh my gosh, this is a lot to just think through. And that only takes me to 8:05. So that's what, 25 minutes of my day. The next lever should really help with some of this and implementation. But let's first talk through ways to encourage the sensory breaks and tools that we can embed into the structure of our day. So next slide, please.
So just like Laura said, there are different sensory breaks and tools that can be useful to incorporate in routines and schedules that can prevent that dysregulation. These are just a couple examples. If students are given the opportunity for regulation activities throughout the day, they know where to go to access these tools and strategies. They can help them prevent dysregulation and practice when they are more calm, which then they can use in moments of dysregulation. For example, if you practice at that 8:05 time every day, the breathing techniques, well, when then there's a fire drill that's maybe unexpected, they can utilize that coping strategy, that calming sensory break. So the difference between sensory tools is like providing an item like a stress ball or a textured object, a chewy necklace, earplugs, a weighted lap pad, or a fidget spinner to help regulate when the sensory overload occurs. And then a sensory break is like short breaks throughout the day where students can engage in calming activities like deep breathing, stretching, or movement exercises in a designated quiet area. So for movement breaks, sometimes an energetic go noodle is great and it's super needed. But simple transitional movement breaks, like put your hands up, touch your toes, do that 5 times, and then go sit on the carpet. Sometimes that is also just the trick that students need. So I would consider, when incorporating this, the energy level of the room. Maybe do the movement break, but then incorporate something calming after. Don't leave the energy level up too high. Like when students come in from recess, they've been playing with their friends and having this great grand old time. So when they're coming in, they're still up high. Maybe turning off the lights, putting their head down on the desk, playing calming music, taking deep breaths for a few minutes could really put them into a spot of regulation to then be ready to learn. Now, fidgets, I feel like, are one of those things that's a common word that we hear in schools. It's important to establish rules and expectations with fidgets. They are not a toy. If a student is accessing a fidget, it's not something that they're throwing to and from their friend or sharing with their friend. They should be able to use it in their hands and focus still what is going on in the classroom. Simple here is also better sometimes, like something at the top of a pencil or even a little squishy that they can hold in the palm of their hand. And then there's sensory specific accommodation. So for some students, they may need more specific tools to help them be regulated, like those chewy necklaces or earplugs when things are too loud, or the latted weight pad for that deep pressure proprioceptive input. And you can consult the IEP team or your OTs at your site for this, and breathing techniques as well. I feel like that's a common, like, oh, just take a deep breath, but it's in through your nose, out through your mouth, or finger breathing where there's 5 fingers and you count as you breathe on your fingers. So then it's a visual to anchor students while they're breathing. All of these things can be incorporated with your schedules and routines. Next slide.
So the second lever is around visuals. And when I talk about visuals, I'm referring to anything that someone may see when they're in your thinking and learning space. Next slide. Having a schedule is great, but allowing students access to the schedule visually is really the next step. Visuals can offer support for the structures of schedules and routines that we implement into our spaces. Visuals can be gestures, which are movements that we might pair. They indicate information. Pictures, it can be images, drawings, or photographs, which give information. Written words, this can be language frames. This can be posted schedules. This can be sentence starters. This can be part of graphic organizers. Physical boundaries, including the carpet, how we're using our desks, carpet, dots on the floor. How do students know what space is for which part of our day or for which activity? A great tip, often if you find yourself verbally repeating something, it might be a cue to create a visual. We also want to model referring to the visuals as we teach students. Visuals are something that remain even if you're not in the space. They really help build student agency. And when students know what to reference, whether you're there or not in the classroom or in your learning space, it helps them just kind of know that we're still business as usual, even if the teacher isn't there. Next slide. We're going to watch this video from Lanisha Tab, and this is kind of just demonstrating some gestures in practice. Will you unmute, Sue? I think you're, yeah.
Body. So if my body does something, your body does it. Ready? First things first. First things first. Make it better. She's on it, right? Make it better. Kid step. You've got to edit. Edit means fix all the things. Step. Step. Send your work into the world. Two claps and oh yeah. That is called the writing process. Say the writing process. I'm gonna do it one more time. This time, I want you to whisper it.
Okay, we're going to pause there. We can go back to the slide deck. On my end, the audio wasn't great. And so that's okay, because I think what you noticed was that she was pairing the visuals with what it is she was saying. She was taking students through the writing process, and she was talking about first step by putting up the first finger. Then she had second step, third step. And this is a teacher who uses this while in small groups also. And when students are stuck as far as where they need to go, she will say, what's our writing process chant? And she'll bring the students back, and she will have students say, first things first, right? And she'll have them walk through that, because that gives them that practice and that connection with the gesture, not just her having to say, oh, the next step is this. Next slide, please. This is a couple images that we're pretty familiar with when it comes to gestures in practice. We use the quiet the quiet gesture or clapping when we're breaking apart sentences, words, or word parts. We use gestures throughout the day, and we understand that there's value in our gestures as educators. But something to really consider is being clear on pairing your gestures with what it is you're trying to say, or the language that matches that. There are times that our gestures might not match what we're verbally saying. Next slide, please. Here's some pictures in practice. As you see, this is a schedule posted on the left-hand side, and you will see that it has those images, pictures next to it. Not all of our students are fluent readers. And so for them to understand what's happening throughout our day, it's important that we pair that with an image that makes sense to them. Another example of pictures in practice is an ideal state of materials, or an ideal state of a space in the classroom, where on the right, you'll see that these are 4 supply boxes plus kind of their supply caddy. And this is ideal state. So as students leave for the day, they want their tabletops to look like this, and students can reference that, and it doesn't require the teacher to say, is everything where it should be? Do you know where it should be? When students say, am I done? You can say, does it match the visual? It just helps kind of increase student independence, and they use their resources. Next slide, please. Another picture in practice. This is a picture of students walking down the hallway. I've seen images like this posted on a door before we walk out of the classroom. Let's remember what it's like to walk in a line. But those same images can be used in a social narrative while we're teaching the skill of walking down the hallway in our kinder, first, second grade, even maybe third and fourth grade classrooms, if that is part of your kind of expectations at school. It really allows that extra level of support in walking down the hall. Next slide, please. Here's an example of the written word in practice. This is something that allows students to access and reference during stations or during their center time. I've seen many classrooms start to use kind of Canva or a slide deck where it splits up their groups and students can reference where their name is and where that group is. It's to be expected here that station 1 has something that's indicating where station 1 is. So it might be that the yellow table in the classroom is station 1. Station 2 is that pink color. And so that's probably labeled somewhere else in the class as well. And students know how to work through that. Next slide, please. Another example or two of written word in practice. The first one is student facing, and it's supporting a specific routine of transitioning from the classroom after recess. Going from recess to the classroom, sorry. The second image is from a TK classroom where it's kind of their building zone where they have blocks, and it's labeled the construction zone in this classroom. And it's a great visual reminder to the teacher, instructional assistants, any visitors that come into the space, what they might engage with students around, because it lists the questions that you can ask. So it gives you those sentence frames. And so as an adult, I can also walk into that space as a substitute teacher. I can say, oh, when the students are exploring, here are the things that I can ask students. Next slide, please. This is sort of a maybe a higher grade level of something similar to that construction zone, but maybe this is for a substitute teacher or someone running a small group. Here is the task that they are completing with that group. They're going to read a story. Those pages are noted. Then they're going to also read Stop, It's a Frog. They're going to finish that unit 3 packet, then they're going to do my shared reading, and then they have the life cycle of a frog. So this again gives students kind of what's expected during this chunk of day, as well as the adult that might be facilitating that group, what to be expected and where to access those pieces. The page numbers are there. Next slide, please. Here are some physical boundaries in practice. The first one you can see is sort of a calming corner, but what I want to kind of draw your attention to is that this teacher has used bookshelves on both sides, a kind of a cubby hole on one side and a bookshelf on the other side to really carve out, this is the space for where we might engage in quiet time, cave space, calming. And then that second picture, this is in sort of maybe some sites call them malls or collab spaces, but it's really clear that when you're engaging with taking a break and you're looking at those zones of regulation, you remain on this carpet, right? You don't have the whole space to take your break. You have this space on the carpet to take your break. And so that's just a way to use some of the things that we find physically in our classrooms to create that visual structure for our students. Next slide, please. This picture keeps flipping. Okay, so the one on the left it's supposed to be tilted back right, and it is a picture of a bookshelf that is blocking off a teacher desk. Yeah,
sorry.
That's okay. And so that's a boundary that this teacher has implemented and has said, we don't cross this area. And so can you go back one slide? Thank you. And so that's a physical barrier, using that bookshelf to say, this is my space, you're allowed access to the rest of the classroom. And then on the right, this is a picture of a classroom where you can see there are 2 separate small groups happening at the same time, and there's this bookshelf in between. It's there to lessen distractions because the 2 groups are working on something separately, but also it allows students to really understand that I'm either at table 2 or group 2, which is sort of red, and there's a sign hanging at the top, but you can see the blue one to the right a little bit better. And that's table 3, and it's the blue table. And so when I'm at the blue table, here's what I'm working on, and here's the teacher that I'm working with. And so we know that we're doing different things at each table. So just some physical boundary examples. Next slide, please.
So using visuals can support students' regulation. They can help students clearly know the expectations and minimize confusion. So some examples are like those visual schedules, daily schedules on the board, a mini schedule for a student, those visual environmental cues like the stop sign on the teacher desk, and then remembering just to use visuals that are at the level of your students so they can access them more independently. So for our lower grades, kindergarten, we're using a lot of pictures. For upper grades, you can incorporate more of those words. Using visuals can eliminate the kind of in-between or decision paralysis that can occur when students are dysregulated. So choices are a singular, previously agreed upon, visual schedule or instruction that can facilitate the process of becoming regulated. So for example, having the visual of like the zones of regulation or a deep breathing visual in the classroom, so they have access to it all the time. It gives them something concrete to refer to, helping them quickly understand and act on their feelings without always needing to put it into words. You want to place visuals where students can easily see them and refer to them as needed. You will need to teach and probably reteach students how to use these visuals. It does take a little extra time, but it will be worth it when students know exactly what to do when they are feeling overwhelmed or unsure. So using these visuals while teaching enhances understanding, supports communication, facilitates their memory and recall, and increases engagement. It'll make learning more effective and less anxiety inducing. So an example, some of the ones you see up here, this visual has a finger for how they're feeling. So the teacher can do a quick check of the room. Maybe if the student is feeling angry, they can sit and put their finger up. Number one, the teacher knows they don't even have to say anything. Less verbal, and when they're dysregulated, can be helpful. Having a visual of calming strategies that you guys as a class understand how to do and how to use can be helpful. We also want to be mindful that there can be too many visuals, right? And that can be distracting and hindering to regulation. So being really mindful about the visuals that you do use as a class, decide on, one or two deep breathing visuals or one or two visuals of a regulation break area. We want the choices to be simple and not too difficult for them to access, especially during a time when students are dysregulated. Next slide. Flexible learning environments are our next lever. So Laura's going to share a little bit about this. Next slide.
So when we talk about flexible learning environments, I had a mentor that really encouraged me to think about a 3x3. And because at first it just felt overwhelming and that it was a free-for-all. And he really said, we want you to think about opportunities for students to work alone, to work collaboratively, and to work as a whole group. And so he talked about the campfire, which is the community space, the watering hole, where it's collaborative space, and the cave space, which is independent workspaces. And it's important to just think about how in your classroom, you're providing opportunities throughout the day for students to access what they need, because there might be times that they will collaborate for 2 hours beautifully, but they're like, now I need time for myself and I just need to like come back and find my sort of baseline, because that was a lot of collaboration and I need to think and process by myself in quiet. The other thing he talked about was really thinking about that other three, having different layers or levels of kind of sitting, right? You can use the floor space so students are able to lay on the ground. You can sit on the floor by using a chair. You can lay on the floor. You can sit on the floor, but you have a lower desk. You can do your standard sitting where you have kind of that standard tabletop, or you can access standing learning opportunities where you have maybe a tall table. Let's jump into the next slide and I can show you a couple examples of this. This is a great classroom example. If you notice in the middle here, you have that floor seating where it's a standard circle table that they've taken the legs off of, and students are able to sit on those soft seats, but they don't need to sit on those soft seats. You have that standard level where you see the traditional desks, as well as straight back, you see kind of a newer furniture with soft seating that students can access, kind of that traditional level of learning. And then on both kind of outsides of these pictures, you see that standing level. They have some high chairs, but also this allows students to just stand and maybe move their bodies in a different way to access learning. Next slide, please. In this picture, I want you to really look at this horseshoe table in the back. This is a standard horseshoe table that now with risers becomes a standing table. And so it's really easy to turn in traditional furniture into something that creates a little more access for students while also having kind of that height interest. Next slide. Here's another classroom. And there were kind of two things that I wanted you to note here. Students have access to a flexible learning environment. They can sit at their desk. They can also sit on the carpet or on the floor. They can sit on a bean bag. But I also want you to note the taped boxes on the ground. So this is a physical kind of visual indication of this is where a group can meet, and so that they don't have students running into each other. So you can see that there are 3 boxes kind of in this picture where students know that this is a space where we can collaborate. Next slide.
So when we think about this from an OT perspective, the classroom environment, there's a lot of flexibility in there, adjusting lighting, noise levels, the way you move the furniture around the room. And alternative seating is better with a somewhat structure. Like if you offer a lot of options, it's like making sure that those options are serving a purpose. So if a student is in like the blue zone or they're falling asleep, maybe they need to be standing at their desk or have them move to and from a different spot. Like, or if a student is in the yellow area, they need to sit on their knees or lay on their stomach with a clipboard to kind of get some of that input. And some common sensory needs that like might reflect the need for classroom accommodations are like tactile defensiveness. So if they're sensitive to touch, or auditory sensitivity, like noises are too loud, visual stress, that's kind of what we talked about with the visuals, if there's too much going on in the classroom. Proprioceptive needs, that's the deep pressure, like laying on your stomach or using a weighted lap pad. And then vestibular needs, so need for movement and balance and or like rocking chairs, like all of that can be accommodated through the flexible learning environments. Next slide.
Okay, so the 4th lever is small groups. Next slide, please. Small groups are really an invaluable tool to support every student in your classroom. In the first picture, you'll see a teacher working with a small group during ELA. In the second picture, you see a classroom with small groups running nearest us. They're working on an assessment at that table, and the teacher is observing how they are completing and working through that assessment. But you also see the rest of the class where they are working at their tables. They might be sitting on the carpet. They might be sitting in Big Joe's. Really allowing students to have kind of choice as they work through small group rotations or tasks that happen in the classroom. Of everything in this presentation, implementing small groups throughout your school day is probably the heaviest lift, but it will really improve student success and agency. The most important piece to consider is that as you're running a small group, what are the other students doing? And what was really nice about small groups is that I could make sure that I met with every single student every day, maybe not in a specific content area, maybe that was every other day, but allowed me to kind of connect with my students and really know where they were versus waiting for an assessment to kind of tell me. If this is something that you're interested in, please reach out. I'm happy to talk through small groups with you. But I know that it is a really big lift and just something to kind of start thinking about as we might be planning, for the spring, for next year. Next slide, please. The 5th and final lever is around relationships and community building. A positive teacher-student relationship really supports that co-regulation. Students who have a good relationship with their teachers feel safe, and they come to them when things are challenging or they're needing support. Next slide.
We're really, there are ways to build relationships and community in our classroom, things that are proactive that we're doing daily to build community, and then reactive, what are we doing after something happens to restore our relationships and community. Next slide. So here are some proactive strategies to support community building, images of how students greet their teacher at the beginning of every day. Standing at your door and greeting every student gives you kind of a quick pulse on where everyone's at. And if you have a soft start to your morning, this also allows you to check in with any students who may have struggled the day before, or those who seem kind of unlike themselves when saying good morning. Next slide.
This is another proactive strategy. This can be a daily SEL check-in. And what's really powerful with this is if you do it as a whole group, a teacher can model what it's like to feel something other than happy. And how we might use a strategy to help us get through our day. Some of our students come to school and they're really upset and they don't know how to navigate through that and understand that that emotion can leave them and that they can kind of turn around their day. So having this be a structure in your classroom every day allows you to model what it's like to be happy, but also what it's like when maybe you're not feeling happy. Maybe you didn't have your coffee. Maybe you didn't get to work out. Like maybe you're just feeling it and you just want to let them know and model like, but I'm still here and I'm going to do the best I can. I do recognize the time is 10:41. I'm going to give us maybe 3 more minutes and then we will be done. Okay, next slide. Also, that piece around reactive, right? We know that with everything that's going on as teachers, we can do everything correctly. We can try and have a textbook perfect classroom, but with variability, our students show up and there are things that interrupt their access to learn. And the most important tips to really think about are, number 1, remain neutral. Continue to engage with the rest of your students, and your students look to you for kind of how it is that you are engaging with the student, how it is that you're feeling in the classroom. And so how can you regulate yourself if there's an event that is occurring? Number 2, always have a plan B. This can look like having a go bag if you're needing to evacuate. Having a go bag says that I am prepared and I understand and I have my students' best interest in mind, but we need to leave the classroom right now because there's a dangerous situation. And because you are prepared, that also allows you to feel calm and your students to look to you to say, okay, my teacher knows what she's doing. We're going to go and we're going to have a learning experience outside. And number 3, I think it's really hard for us, but I want us to try to take a deep breath and allow your students fresh starts. Try not to hold their past in your mind and in your energy and provide them the opportunity to fix the harm. There's a lot of power in restorative circles and having conversations with students. Creating spaces for students to work through low-level disagreements regularly allows that when there is a big situation that happens, that the structures are in place and students can speak openly about those things and respectfully. We really want to value the community, and how do we repair that community when harm is done? There's huge value in allowing students to engage in that conversation back and forth. And while you might be the guide, it isn't your words that are navigating that conversation. It's student to student, and students hearing student feedback has a greater impact on our students than if you were just to kind of say, you're really hurting students' feelings. But having a student speak to how that hurt their feelings really matters. Next slide. Okay, so those were the 5 environmental levers. We're going to move into strategies for teachers and staff. Maybe give us 2 minutes and then we will close. Okay, next slide.
You can go to the next slide. So here are just some strategies to support that co-regulation, right? We talked about in the beginning, that's that process where people are interacting to help each other manage emotions and stress. So our own stress can make our students feel stressed. Our calm can make our students feel calm. So successful co-regulation, involves helping the child calm down, which is why the first step requires you to deal with your own stress, right? Or our own stress in a healthy way. Having those strong positive relationships with students help support that co-regulation in the classroom environment. It can help us develop regulation skills, can help build trust and safety. It can help people enhance their emotional well-being. So on the screen, deep breathing, creating that calm down space, positive teacher-student relationships, labeling emotions, being physically present with your students, validating and modeling that calm behavior. Next slide.
And then some strategies for teachers. So recognizing your own triggers so you can stay calm, taking a minute for yourself. I know the days get busy and full, but using some of these strategies could be that difference between being able to keep yourself regulated and then contribute to co-regulation for your students. So different breathing techniques, write down moments of gratitude or your favorite moments of being a teacher, reflect on mentors or previous all-star moments in teaching when you just know you nailed it. Get up and move, go on a walk, dance around your classroom. And then sensory strategies also, turn off the lights, play your favorite music, play some white noise. Some of this can be really, even for like a minute to 30 seconds, make a big difference in your day. Next slide.
Okay, we've almost made it. We are going to close our learning for today. Let's go to that next slide. Thank you so much for taking time with us to talk through regulation and environment. Let's take a moment to pause and review what we spoke about today. Next slide. We went through introductions. We talked about what regulation is. We talked about the 5 environmental levers of structure, visuals, flexible learning environments, small groups, relationships and community building, strategies that you yourself can use and model. And now we're here at closing. Will you please go to the next slide?
Okay, last thing. I'm sure you guys have a Post-it, a piece of paper. We would like for you to just write down one thing that you're interested in learning more about or trying tomorrow when you return to your spaces with your students. So I know some things you learned today may take some time and preparation to incorporate, but we hope that you learned some strategies that you can implement into your day even tomorrow. Thank you.
Next slide.
Thank you for coming. If you have any questions, because especially if we breeze through at the end, please follow up, fill out this Google form, and we will follow up in the coming days. So I'm going to include that again in the chat. It's been throughout. So if you need it, it is there. Thank you.
Thank you.